There we go. We are cooking, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely cooking. I'm super excited. Super excited to be here for this live stream. I think there honestly is a lot to talk about. In all honesty, um, I really wanted to come on here because obviously the significance of what's going on with really the SEC and talking about the Big 12 and really some situations that could happen. So I want to at least pull those up. I get my Twitter over here, and then we'll attach it to the screen so you guys can see kind of some of the scenarios that I saw. I really do. Looks like we're lagging a little bit because this is loading. Hang on. Come on. Maybe. Well, while we wait for that to load, I got the Royals game on. Carlos Santana with an absolute wall scraper of a home run to right field. Absolutely amazing to see. Obviously, because that puts the Royals ahead 5-1. And the Tigers have been on such a hot streak, and it's nice to see like Chris Bubic go out there. He's currently at 76 pitches in the top of the sixth. Doesn't appear to be any out. So, but it's nice to see Chris go out there and shove, especially because now was on such a hot streak. I think it was seven games for sure. All right, this is loading. Hopefully, we quit to lagging a little bit. Well, hopefully, the lag will slow down. Oh, come on. I'm like overloading this system. I have a ton of tabs open because I've been doing a lot of stuff. And then obviously I'm live streaming. So that's really kind of pulling pretty hard. And my computer's like 9 to 10 years old. So I do have a pretty cool announcement while this is going through. I did purchase a pool today. And the pool is about 16 feet. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm excited because I've always wanted a pool, and I might regret it, come down the road when I'm out there cleaning it nonstop. But it's one that you just assemble. You put it up and you snap the poles together and things like that. It's nothing super fancy. But yeah, I'm excited. I've always wanted a pool. 16 feet, pretty big. I was out there in the backyard measuring, and I'm looking forward to it. So, all right, we're going to dive into this. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. Let's see. So hopefully this works. Yes, I know. Thank you. Okay, so it'll share this screen. That's not really what I was hoping for. Let's go big. There we go. Okay, so this specific one came from Nick Weepert, I think is how you say his name. Obviously, 306 people have liked this, including myself. There were some comments, so I'm going to go ahead and make this bigger because I think this one, there is another one. I think what's significant from this one is the fact that they are predicting the Big 12 to disband, to disassemble and fall apart. The next one that I will show you still has the Big 12, and I'll explain kind of some of my thoughts on that one. But I really wanted to dive in this one because it really shows a good depiction of exactly why they put certain teams into certain conferences. Obviously, we understand Oklahoma and Texas are going to the SEC, which then creates a 16-team SEC. Now, as we're going to get going through this, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about something I talked to a good friend of mine at work named Josh, and it'll make sense because you can see how this is broken down. Maybe it's something that you guys would be interested in. If you are, definitely leave a comment in the comment section because that's something that I would be very interested in hearing your thoughts on. So we're going to start out. The first thing you're going to see is the Big Ten. And obviously, it will not be 10 teams anymore. It would be like the Big 16, but as of right now, it's Big 10. So you can see that the two teams that are added to make it 16 are going to be the Kansas Jayhawks and the Iowa State Cyclones. So the West in this case would be Nebraska, KU, Iowa State, and Iowa. Now, if you really are contemplating or debating that from a football perspective, I mean, let's be real, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm willing to admit I've written multiple articles on KU's current state in football. I've talked about some of the things that I would expect or hope to see, KU football take some certain strides in certain aspects when it comes to their football program. And again, I'm going to be honest with you. I think the biggest thing is that, obviously we understand KU basketball is a blue blood. And, there's not very many blue bloods out there. But what is really kind of significant is it just demonstrates and shows you the significance of football. And I think everyone that would be watching this completely understands that because football is a money generator. But then also it depends on the conference you're in and how much money you can anticipate from all kinds of different deals, whether that's television, media, things like that. So with this being said, as you guys can see, we're going to get back to it. It says that KU, Nebraska, Iowa State, and Iowa would all be in the same division. At the current state right now, I think you would see Iowa State and Iowa honestly duking it out for the West. If Nebraska does get a little bit better, obviously there's a chance, but I think in the current state, those two would be going at it for obviously that top spot, which in all honesty would be amazing. I mean, those two are, kind of rivals. And I mean, Iowa versus Iowa State, that's a pretty significant, West division there. Now you transfer over to the South, Illinois, Purdue, Northwestern, and Indiana. And then the North is Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Michigan State. Again, you're putting Michigan and Michigan State in there to keep that rivalry alive. And then obviously you have Ohio State, Penn State, Maryland, and Rutgers. So really from the Big Ten perspective, I think what is cool and something that I would like to see them incorporate if this were to happen, because you have 4 monster powerhouses. So the Power 4 is what we're going to refer this to. You would have each one of those divisions, I guess, represent or have a winner by the end of the season. And when that time comes, those two teams, or in this case, the 4 teams would play each other based on a seeding, obviously, record. And from that, you would draw your conference champion. From that conference champion, you would then go to the 4, obviously the 4-round playoff that we're used to now. So you creating a playoff style almost kind of similar to what they have in college basketball. In a way, it's, a bracket. But ideally what you're doing is you're taking 4 winners from each conference. They play head-to-head. Whoever is the dominant team at the end of the day, at the end of the conference championship, that's who represents that conference moving forward in the championship for football, basically the Final Four of football. And so that's a very similar situation over here in the SEC. And it's going to be like that across the board. I think what's very cool about this one is the fact that it was drawn out. It shows a tremendous representation from the United States perspective, how close these schools would actually be. That is a big reason why I envision, if this does go through to the way it would in this case, KU joining the Big Ten. I completely understand that KU this year, probably next year and the year after that, isn't going to have a very competitive football team. And then honestly, if you had to really say it right now, there's a good chance KU has probably one of the worst, if not the worst, Power 5 football teams, in the current state. But as they progress, I think this potentially could be a better conference when it comes to basketball. Now, if you asked me 2-3 years ago, I would disagree. I think the Big 12, very was very represented when it came to obviously, basketball. But this is solely happening, in my opinion, and a lot of people's thoughts are because of football. So the SEC, 16 teams, they add Oklahoma and Texas University. So the West Division would be Oklahoma, Texas A&M, LSU, and Texas. I think that's a tremendous division. And if you really think about it, it's tremendous across the board in every sport. So then you go to the North. You would have Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Arkansas, and Missouri. Again, another pretty solid division there, especially from football. I think, honestly, it's tough to really say in that West Division just because Texas A&M went 9-1. Oklahoma, obviously, is dominating, the Big 12 a lot of the time. LSU is on the rebound, but we've seen what they can do when they go out and get the recruits. Obviously the years before where they had Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. I mean, the list goes on and on when you're talking about very solid, players there at LSU. I mean, you're not even talking about like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Leonard Fournette, and all the historical players that run through there, like the Honey Badger and Patrick Peterson. And I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. I mean, there truly are a ton of LSU, legends there. But then you kind of look at that North too, and it's like, man, that's potentially still providing some good football. East, Vanderbilt has been the bottom of the barrel when it comes to really football in that. Tennessee, Kentucky, and South Carolina have all been in the middle of the pack. So really the East would be a battle to see who honestly would go. And then, those teams, like Tennessee can get definitely some recruits at times, and they probably could compete. But when you're talking about the South is going to be an incredible football division if this were to happen. I mean, you're talking Alabama, you're talking Florida, you're talking Auburn and Georgia. I mean, those, three of those teams have been in the top 5, at least top 10 multiple times. Even Auburn has been there quite a bit. I mean, they had Cam Newton run through there, and just a tremendous conference, and you can understand why, they're doing what they're doing when it comes to football and just athletics in general. I mean, every one of those teams is going to be extremely competitive. They're going to recruit. They're going to do very well. And I think each division we've covered so far really offers, something in that facet. Now you're looking at the Pac-12, and in this case, again, the name would be changed. But as you can see from a demographic standpoint, it really does provide a great, opportunity for these teams. This is the division the conference that adds the most. They're going to be adding the 4, which have been rumored to go to the Pac-12 quite a bit: Texas Tech, Baylor, K-State, and Oklahoma State. Now, I do kind of want to clear something up, just based on some things that I've seen. There is nothing that ties KU and K-State together that states that they have to stay together. And so I don't think that they will be staying together if that is the case, unfortunately. That truly is a huge rivalry for us. The Sunflower Showdown is a very big rivalry. It really is something that you get excited about, you get fired up about, and it's just always a good competitive, game, no matter what sport it's in. But in this case, they're getting added to the Pac-12. So again, they've added the 4 teams from the Big 12. So the West Division would be UCLA, Stanford, USC, and Cal. Again, a very, very good division within the conference of the Pac-12. And again, that is going to be a very good football conference division. And even when you start talking other sports, like I immediately think that's a decent basketball one as well. And then when you extend it out to even like baseball, softball, some of those types of sports, like softball obviously is represented very well from UCLA. UCLA has been in the Women's College World Series multiple times. And then you obviously switch over to the North. Again, you're seeing some very good competitive football there, but it translates into the other sports. So a lot of these alignments kind of really translate well and create good competitions within those conferences. But again, it always resorts back to, can they compete with that SEC? So the South, Utah, Arizona, Colorado, Arizona State, The North, again, was Oregon State, Oregon. I believe that's Washington State and Washington. The East is going to be all 4 of the Big 12 schools that come in. So Texas Tech, Baylor, K-State, and Oklahoma State. Those schools are obviously very familiar with themselves, and so they would plug right in right there in the East. And, when you're talking football, that honestly could be a very competitive East division there. K-State obviously has a very good coach in Coach Kleinman. He's starting to get that program back in place. We know that Oklahoma State has a very good program. Texas Tech loves to sling the rock. It is very, air raidy type offense. And then Baylor has been kind of hit or miss, but they've had their moments. They've had their years where they've been very good. So if I had to say, though, out of every team that every division, conference, I keep saying division, but conference, I would say that that's probably going to be the weakest. That's just my opinion. I think when you look at it from a football perspective, I think that is honestly going to be the weakest division. I could be wrong. Conference. I think it's going to be the weakest conference because then you look at the ACC, and this makes sense. I do think when the Big East really fell apart, West Virginia probably could have went to the ACC. They just were not wanted there. I mean, from a geographical standpoint, West Virginia should have been inserted into the ACC, and they go ahead and add Notre Dame. So in this case, the West Division, Louisville, Virginia, Virginia Tech, and Notre Dame are in the West. The North Division is going to be Pittsburgh, West Virginia, Syracuse, and Boston College. The South will be Clemson, Florida State, Georgia Tech, and Miami. Holy smokes. Talk about a football division right there. East is going to be Carolina, Duke, Syracuse. Oh, nope, that's Carolina, or what is that? Carolina State and Wake Forest. South Carolina State, and Wake Forest. A very good, that right there is going to be a very good basketball. Obviously the ACC is very known for their basketball. It is pretty, is gaining a lot of attention when it comes to football. Obviously they have Clemson. Miami is a recovering program. Florida State's kind of in the recovery mode, but we know the historical factors that come with Florida State, Miami. Clemson's obviously dominating right now. Notre Dame has been pretty solid and consistent. North Carolina has kind of been on the uppity up. Duke has kind of been doing some things. So you really do have some, competitive football programs there. Louisville, Virginia Tech even. I mean, there are some pretty good football teams, but if I saw that, I would immediately think basketball outside of Clemson, in all honesty, because you have Blue Bloods in Duke, North Carolina, and then you really start talking from a basketball. You have, just looking at it, Florida State's been pretty consistent as of late, going to the tournament and doing well in the tournament. West Virginia has been very competitive for the most part inside the Big 12. And then you have schools like Syracuse, Boston College, Notre Dame, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. I mean, some of those schools are pretty competitive. Louisville's on the uppity up. So I really think basketball for the most part when I see the ACC. Now, from an overall big-time perspective, I really do like this setup, and I honestly hope that this is what would happen. I'm kind of advocating for KU being added to the Big Ten. My only downfall and my biggest issue is the fact that with the Big 12 comes, the Big 12 tournament here in Kansas City, down in Kansas City, Missouri, and that's a huge, huge revenue generator for the city. You have people coming in from all over the Big 12. They get to hang out at, the T-Mobile Center now, which is basically housed within the Power and Light District. There's so much that goes on at the Power and Light District. There's so many restaurants and just opportunities to really kind of have a good time. So I feel that if they join the Big Ten, it's going to get pulled from there on a consistent basis, just because you have Indianapolis involved. You start incorporating some of the other big cities that are incorporated with the Big Ten. But you never know. I mean, maybe that's something that could be agreed upon later on down the road. But I really do like this representation. I really wanted to show you guys this. This is something that I want to keep and see how accurate it ends up becoming down the road. again, I really do like how they break it up into, they 4 conferences, so 4 power conferences. And within the 4 power conferences, you have 4 divisions in each one. So I hope that ends up being the case. Now, the other one that I saw was this one. And I do really like this one. And again, you can play out the scenario where on the left side, you have a football winner, and on the right side, you have a football winner. And in that case, that would be your, we'll just say, for example, the Big 12, because they're right there in the middle. And I'm used to the Big 12 championship just because KU has been in there, and that's the one that I follow to the most extensively. So we're just going to go ahead and say the Big 12. So let's just use it for example. Let's say Oklahoma State wins, and then the University of Houston wins. So you would have that as your Big 12 championship. From that, we'll say Oklahoma State wins over Houston. Oklahoma State would represent your team in this case, a 5-team playoff. Now, that's where it gets confusing because obviously there's a 4-team playoff, and that I don't know how they would incorporate the 5th. So that's where it gets confusing, but I think it ideally kind of how the representation occurred in that first one. I think that's how you would really play the scenario out. And I really like, what we saw in the last one. I think some of this is if the Big 12 sticks around, I don't see or forecast KU or Iowa State leaving. I think that they would want to stay in that conference. I think they would want to stay in the conference again because then you can have the Big 12 tournament in Kansas City and bring all these teams in. I do like to see some of the teams that have been implemented into the Big 12 conference, like Cincinnati, who was actually trying to come to the Big 12. We ended up taking West Virginia over Cincinnati, I believe. But I do like this from a basketball standpoint, but KU needs to have some of that competition. I outside of Houston from last year and maybe Cincinnati, I'm not seeing that much competition when it comes to basketball. And really from a football conference, you can kind of see UCF has had some very good years. Southern Florida has had some very good years. K-State has had some good years. Oklahoma State, Cincinnati has had a few. But outside of that, you really are not, represented probably the way a Power 5 conference should be represented. And I think that this would be the weakest conference of all 5 for sure. And maybe that's why they envision KU and Iowa State bumping to the Big 10 still. And even then, you're looking at it from a football perspective. I almost think you have to look at it from a football perspective. And the reason is because we understand, again, biggest revenue generator. And really that's the big reason why this is even being discussed today on this live stream is because Texas and Oklahoma decided to move to the SEC. So we're going to go ahead and break this down from again, like we broke the last one down. The ACC would have Virginia, Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, West Virginia, Louisville, Syracuse, Boston College, Pittsburgh. And then on the South Division, you would have Florida State, Duke, Miami, North Carolina, Georgia Tech, Clemson, Wake Forest, and North Carolina State. I said South Carolina State in the last one. North Carolina State Wolfpack. I do like that from, again, a basketball, and you have some very good competitive football teams in there. Clemson, obviously, has been in the national championship quite frequently as of late. But you also have North Carolina State, who was doing very well in the College World Series, probably had a good chance to win the College World Series, except they were struck by the pandemic. But you do have some very good basketball teams in the ACC, obviously. Duke, North Carolina, Syracuse, West Virginia has been doing pretty solid. Virginia Tech have been pretty solid. You have some rebounding programs like Wake Forest and Miami, Boston College, Louisville. So you really do kind of have some good things there. Now, when you look at the Big 10, they did, again, incorporate KU and Iowa State. So from a football perspective, I really like this conference. I would have to personally say this is my second place football conference. They would then be incorporating still the worst Power 5 football team in KU into there, but you're also then inserting Iowa State, who has been pretty competitive the last, at least 5 years. But you're also incorporating Iowa, Northwestern, Nebraska, Illinois is in there, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Obviously we've seen Wisconsin do some pretty solid things. They've produced some very good running backs. One of our local kids is actually going to be the starting quarterback there in Graham Ertz. So they really do have some ties. And obviously Nebraska is coming from the Big 12 definitely a few years ago. But again, that rivalry could be, fired back up. Again, you like to see the Iowa State. And, when you start talking about what KU is actually really good at, you're talking about basketball. So there's some good competition in there as well. You got Illinois. Wisconsin has been pretty solid. We see what Iowa has been doing. Michigan has been doing very, very well at basketball. We understand what Michigan State has and Tom Izzo. Ohio State has kind of been turning it around. Maryland, Indiana. I mean, let's be real. Indiana is amazing, from the historical standpoint. Purdue has had their flashes. So from an overall basketball standpoint, too, that is a very tremendous conference for that. But it is also a powerhouse when it comes to football. And then you start incorporating baseball, softball, and all kinds of other sports. Volleyball, I mean, you're really talking about a very significant conference. We did cover the Big 12 already because I was able to use them as an example. So we're going to go ahead and move on to, and I like how they kind of had to forge the 16 on there for the Pac 16. That kind of made me laugh when I first saw that. But, you got Washington State, Utah, BYU, Oregon State, Boise State, and Colorado. That right there, I think you would have some pretty good competitive football right there. We've seen some pretty talented players come from the likes of Washington. We understand that Alex Smith was a first overall pick from Utah. BYU put Zach Wilson in New York. Oregon State has had a few players. Colorado, I will always have a soft spot for Colorado because of Eric Bieniemy. He is a tremendous coach for the Kansas City Chiefs, the offensive coordinator. And then we know some of the things that have been produced there in Boise State. Leighton Vander Esch is the one that immediately pops to my mind. Now you start talking about USC, UCLA, Cal, Stanford, Arizona, Arizona State, Texas Tech, and TCU. Now that right there is tremendous football. We understand the thoroughbred that you have there in USC. You have UCLA, Cal, Stanford, Arizona, Arizona State, Texas Tech, and TCU. I mean, I like what I see there. So if that were to happen, that would be a pretty solid division, the South Division in the Pac-16. Now, from a basketball standpoint as well, whether you're talking women's or men's, I mean, you have UCLA there. Stanford has been consistent as of late. USC has been doing some pretty solid things there in basketball. Texas Tech, unfortunately they lost Chris Beard to Texas, but Texas Tech has been doing some pretty solid things. TCU, on the other hand, a very, very good baseball program. That's honestly one that I would be excited to see baseball because TCU is consistently good. Texas Tech has been consistently good. We understand Stanford has been pretty solid in baseball. Arizona State has been pretty solid. UCLA is on the uprise. They really haven't been the same since, Garrett Cole and Trevor Bauer and some of those guys have left, but they've been producing some talent. So I think from an overall, I like how this is set up. But again, I just don't envision the Power 5 existing anymore. If this is going to happen, I envision a Power 4. So then you get to the SEC, and we've covered the SEC pretty extensively. It's going to be the exact same as what we saw from the last one. And again, we talked about the competitive nature. The only difference is this one has a West Division and an East Division. And I think when you really look at it from an overall, I think the two teams that are incoming from the Big 12, so you're talking about Texas, you're talking about Oklahoma, coming in and facing off against some of those West Division SEC teams like Texas A&M, Mississippi State, Arkansas, Missouri, LSU, and Ole Miss. You can almost divide it out right there and really determine who's going to be competitive and who's not. Texas A&M went 9-1 last year in a pandemic-driven season. Arkansas has had their flashes, but really has kind of been a bottom feeder, very similar to a 500 type team in Missouri. Mississippi State struggled last year, but they are kind of rebounding. They go out and hire Mike Leach. He's trying to get that program turned around, very similar to LSU as well. When you are constantly pushing big-time significant talent, first-round, second-round talent to the NFL, you have to have a season probably where you're going to have to recharge. You're going to have to get those young guys back to a very competitive level. And last year was probably that time for LSU. They were getting a new quarterback after Joe Burrow was drafted. They had Clyde Edwards-Helaire get drafted to the Chiefs, Justin Jefferson. I mean, you really start talking about that receiving core that was just a dominating force, all kind of heading out, Jamar Chase. So you really do have that. And that's probably why they had to recover and do what they had to do. Oklahoma, obviously, Spencer Rattler's there. I believe he's in the contention and talks already for a Heisman Trophy. So you really do have some very good football programs there. Texas, obviously, getting Steve Sarkisian coming over from Alabama and starting to lead the charge. So I think you could almost like start to divide that out. This is where it gets tough, ladies and gentlemen. I think the East Division in this situation is going to be an absolute dominating force. You have Alabama, who literally is probably a minor league football team to the NFL. I mean, you might as well add them to the schedule for a lot of those teams in the NFL. And then you have, Georgia, who's been very competitive as of late. Florida is starting to come around. Kyle Pitts coming from, Florida, and Trask coming from Florida. And really some good players coming from Florida. It's consistent. Auburn has been kind of up and down, but that they have that opportunity to beat you. And, you can ask Alabama fans how the Auburn burn really is when that kickoff return happened. There's so much that it goes on in that East Division. And when you look at the SEC as a whole, it doesn't really matter what sport you're talking about, men's or women's. They're going to be very good. I immediately think softball, too, outside of the football aspect. You have Alabama. You have Oklahoma, who was in the Women's College World Series, ended up winning the Women's College World Series. You have the likes of, you start talking about Florida. Missouri was in the regional and moving on to the super regional. You really have some good programs from a softball perspective, too. Big fan, big advocate of the Women's College World Series. It's so much fun, very enjoyable to watch. But when you really start to break down this, I really think that that's something that could happen. I want to recap and cover this again. If this happens, I have like this gut feeling, this weird inclination that I don't know if KU and Iowa State would leave the Big 12. I think that they... Iowa State specifically, because when you start talking about outside of football, they were very solid at basketball. Like I stated, like 3 years ago, they were very competitive against KU. Really, the Big 12 as a whole, 3 years ago was just an extremely dominating force in basketball. But now, Iowa State's kind of trickled off. And so really their sport is going to be football. So with that being said, would they – I understand more money is involved with moving to the Big Ten. You're playing a very, very competitive schedule when you go to the Big Ten. But they would have a better opportunity to be more consistently in the top, maybe winning more Big 12 championships, and then representing in more bowl games if they stayed in the Big 12. So that is my question for would Iowa State really take that leap of faith going to the Big Ten, knowing that outside of football, they really don't have that much, and they would just be getting money in that scenario. And I understand when you're talking about this entire aspect, that's really down to it. That's what is driving this is money. And then football. You could go 1A and 1B. Football is generating lots of revenue, which is money. And then you start talking about media deals, TV, everything that comes with that. And that's due to the fact that you're in a competitive league that can go out and get you those deals. So honestly, it's hand in hand. It would be very interesting to see. I'm excited to see this. When this news broke, it really kind of starts making you think of every scenario, every situation. I started thinking, is there a chance KU could find a way to get to the ACC? Would that even be considered an option? Like, would the ACC even be, interested in adding KU? Because KU is a blue blood in basketball. Yes, it's not football, and our football program is definitely bottom feeder. But you're talking about one of the best basketball programs every single year, repeatedly every single year. Plugging them into a very well-known basketball conference, that's something to consider. But I understand the geographical things. I understand that there's a lot that goes into it. We are talking about student athletes. We're not talking about professionals. Even though they can be paid now, they still are there to go get their education. They are still there to go get their, go to class and do things like that. I completely understand that. But you are talking about basically a minor leagues once this happens. And that's what a lot of these kids go to school for, is to play sports. So when you're talking about it, I think that's where this gets pretty significant. And would, the ACC, the Atlantic Coast Conference, would they even be considered, considerate of getting KU into there? And if that's possible, who knows? I personally, again, want to emphasize, I really am looking forward to seeing if KU can be added to the Big Ten. I think this would do a lot. I keep emphasizing how bad the football team is. I do think that we got to give Lance Leipold a chance to really get his program rolling. He goes out and adds a ton of pieces, brings in some former Buffalo players, really goes and implements. It's basically cut down the middle. Half of the coaching staff comes over from Buffalo. The other half is returning from the prior regime, with Les Miles as he goes out the door. But I think what this does too is this gives the opportunity for fans to see teams that they never thought they would see. One, and you're talking about them coming to the likes of Memorial Stadium there in Lawrence, or if you're even interested yourself, going and attending a game. And attending a game at, let's say, Wisconsin, or maybe you're interested in going and see the Michigan Wolverines play KU. And it's not necessarily that would be a competitive football game right away, but maybe you just have always wanted to see the opportunity of Michigan playing in person. Maybe you wanted to see a Heisman Trophy winner, or at least a Heisman candidate, in going and seeing Ohio State. You never know what you're going to see there. Understand they're recruiting the way they should be, but think about the people who have gone through Ohio State, that all those people that have, been fans, and they, have been in the Big Ten, got to see Chase Young, got to see the Bosa brothers, have got to see Ezekiel Elliott when he was, just a dominating force. You got to see some of those quarterbacks like Justin Fields, and JT Barrett, and some of those other quarterbacks that haven't translated into the NFL very well. But it's still the idea that they're there. Nebraska, I enjoy, the idea of seeing a history with Nebraska. Scott Frost trying to still turn that thing around. And again, I mentioned Wisconsin with Graham Mertz. He's a local kid from Blue Valley, here where I live. So there is a lot that I think can be provided. Iowa, obviously, there's a lot of Iowa fans. And then again, Iowa State is a Big 12 school. So I'm going to go ahead and close out what we got pulled up. So then my face gets a little bit bigger. But guys, that's a big significant piece of what I really wanted to talk about tonight. I think that this is something that is going to continuously be talked about, just because, with Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC, that doesn't even really solidify that anything outside of that is going to happen right away. I keep hearing the rumors that the Big 12 ideally would go back to one of the original names, and that would be the Big 8. And then they would just house 8 teams until they could kind of get things figured out. But I've also heard that a lot of these teams have gone into a frantic panic and are trying to already get their plans in place. Rightfully so. I mean, you're talking about you're talking money, and that's again, that's like the biggest piece of this entire thing. Outside of football, revenue, money, that's what drives this. So it's just going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I'm extremely excited to just keep up with this. I've been writing on it. I wrote on it for KC Kingdom. I wrote on it from an overall perspective of the Big 12, but then I bled it into how it really translates and carries over to KU. And could I see them going to the Big 10? Could I see them staying in the Big 12 and some of the other schools coming and joining up? And then I also talked about the Pac 12. So, there really is a lot of things that can happen. I'm excited. I also kind of wanted to give a brief, quick excitement. Sporting Kansas City is currently in second place behind Seattle. They're getting ready to play this Sunday night. And it's going to be a awesome 1 of 3. So this is going to be the first of 3 matches against Seattle. The Sounders, we actually are going to them. It's crazy to think how soccer actually works, because we're going to be down 2 players, not because of, two additional players because of the pandemic, and our coach, Peter Vermees, is going to be out due to COVID. But we're going to be down 2 additional players because they're playing in the Gold Cup. And that's just insane how that works. So one significant thing is that you have to have depth, and I think Sporting Kansas City provides a good opportunity of depth. But this is going to be a tremendous match. They are 5 points up on Sporting Kansas City. And so definitely want to keep an eye on that. The Kansas City Chiefs and most of the NFL will be starting training camp, and it's just going to get rolling. It was very awesome to see that the Kansas City Chiefs have taken, this season very seriously. A lot of them are vaccinated. I think it said 90% of them are vaccinated. They're ready to roll. I think that they're taking last year's Super Bowl as, not the way they I guess they're taking it the way they should. They didn't like the beating that they received. They didn't like seeing their franchise quarterback running around, throwing horizontally 15, 20 yards into the end zone and the ball's not being caught. Offensive line was just, it was just terrible. So there's a lot that's going on in the sports world. I think you guys are going to start to see a lot more of these live streams happen. We're definitely going to start getting more people involved. I would like to see questions and be able to answer questions, because that's what this is about. This is why it's exciting. So I'm going to wrap this one up. We went about 45 minutes. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the conversation about the realignments and what we can expect for college athletics. Leave comments down in the comment section, ladies and gentlemen. Definitely let me know what your guys' thoughts are. You guys have definitely done a tremendous job on the articles that I've written for KC Kingdom. I do really appreciate all the support. It means a ton to me. It really does. I just think that there's, I want to give it my all when it comes to the sports channel. I think there's a lot of things that haven't even untapped yet. I do a lot of interviews. I've been starting to write. I'm starting to live stream. I'm doing some collaborations with some up and coming people for sure. So I really am trying to do the best I possibly can and provide the best content to you guys. And that's what I'm looking forward to, is just constantly being on the grind and providing amazing content to you. So I do appreciate you guys swinging by and checking out the Beat of KC. As always, have a good day.